Hello, I'm Brandy Leach, the sexual assault counselor of Elizabeth Buffum Chase Center. For those that are unfamiliar, EBC is a domestic and sexual violence agency located in Warwick, Rhode Island. Today, we're continuing with our efforts for Sexual Assault Awareness Month and having a discussion with 3 members from the TenMen project regarding the prevention of sexual assault as a men's issue. I want to take a few minutes and allow them to introduce themselves, and we'll get right to the questions. Gentlemen?
Great, thank you. I can start. Brandy, thanks so much first for having us on. This is great, and we're looking forward to the conversation. My name is Lee Clasper-Torch. I'm a longtime educator, teacher of philosophy, religion. Currently, I'm the men's engagement coordinator on staff for the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm glad to be here for this conversation. It's great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Andrade. I live here in the Rhode Island area. I work as an engineer in a local manufacturing company, and so my background is a little bit on the on that sector. And certainly, within the last few years, doing a lot of learning and self-reflection and working on these types of aspects having to do with gender justice. And very excited to be part of this conversation with you all.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Eliel Rivera. I am the Executive Director of Youth in Action, a youth-serving organization in Providence. I also currently live in the Providence area. I'm a lifelong youth worker, educator, and researcher, and a lot of my work has been around deconstructing toxic masculinity and creating safer spaces, and I do a lot of work with the healing of boys and men of color.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for being here, having this discussion with me. On behalf of EBC, we are very excited and appreciative of you taking the time to, have this discussion, which is so important to raise awareness around, sexual assault prevention. So getting right into it, just for those who are unfamiliar with what the TenMen project is, can we just shed some light on the purpose of your, initiative and how you engage communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brandy. The TenMen Project is a prevention-based program of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. It's been going for about 7 years. It's an initiative across the state of Rhode Island to engage men and male-identified folk to work on prevention against violence against women and girls. It's been going for about 7 years. I've been with the program as the men's engagement coordinator and facilitator of the TenMen Project for about 5 years. The dynamism of the program is inviting men into a pretty major community service ask to engage men, to educate one another, to build community and conversation among men, to then mobilize them to go back into their spheres of influence. Mm-hmm. So we engage approximately 10 men each year, invite them to become part of a cohort. They volunteered to do that. These men are community leaders in various places around the state. And we work on engaging and educating ourselves so that we can then shift the culture around men's violence against women and girls. So it's a prevention-based program. We're excited. So we probably had within the TenMen program now approximately 70 men that in some way, shape, or form have been trained and engaged in our program in the community. So,
that's really great. Yeah. That's really great. Thank you for sharing that background with me. So getting into the discussion now, some people are probably watching this thinking like, why are we making this a men's issue? Why is sexual assault prevention even a men's issue? Especially if, you're that man watching this video and you're like, well, I'm not violent, I'm not abusive towards women, so this doesn't apply to me. Like, this isn't my problem. Is it fair for us to even raise that question, raise that issue of sexual assault prevention being a men's issue? What do you think of that?
So, I think it is a men's issue, and if you look at the reality of the situations, the predominant offender and the predominant people that are perpetrating a lot of these acts are men. So there's a responsibility in this realm for us to have these conversations and these dialogues and not just be bystanders, which is like typically what happens with the way that we're socialized as men or male identified figures. Things become normative. That's the whole idea behind like rape culture, right? The idea that sexual assault and the way that we talk and interact with women is normal, and it's become normalized. So work like the TenMen Project works to disrupt that and to start having dialogues and creating the spaces for men to do this work together, because any type of men's work is social justice work inherently.
Thank you, Ellie. I think that was great. And I think for me, who over the last few years has had to really learn and understand a lot more about this, since I have not been in doing that type of social work as a career, I think it's important for men to realize, the history of what it is to have male privilege in society. And that is something that obviously needs to be worked on. It's not obvious, and that's why it's called privilege. And that's why we need to inspect it and reflect on that and be able to know how to use that voice and that influence in society to improve the conditions for women in this case. Also, we have to recognize that when we talk about women's issue, it's usually allowing or almost expecting the victims of these problems to be the ones that resolve it, and not also bring up the responsibility or what the data shows and what historically has been that it is men that are causing these levels of assault. And also there are obviously men that are victims of this. However, predominantly the perpetrators of this are also men. And I think we have to recognize to that and address that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to add. Thank you, Christian. One of the things that brought me to this movement and this work was learning through an educator and author by the name of Jackson Katz, and he said something. And I've said this before, but he said something that really just struck me: is that we often talk about violence against women and girls in that phraseology, violence against women and girls. Mm-hmm. And he said we need to put the active sort of agent back into that men's violence against women and girls, and it shifts the sentence from being passive, right? So just to pick up on what Christian and Elliot are saying, that involves men's accountability and responsibility for the violence, and therefore then it makes sense that it makes really good sense that men become key partners in prevention against violence against women and girls.
I couldn't agree with all of you more than what you just said. But a follow-up question to that: when you are engaging men in your communities, are you meeting resistance to this message? Do people, do they not get it? Do they not support it? Or do you find that you have influence?
Maybe I can start. I think part of the conversation that I have noticed is, first of all, that some men think that that they are not violent themselves, that they are not the ones that are causing the assault or the violence on women and girls, and therefore that they are just by being decent, good men, normal men, that it's somebody else's problem. And I think that's the first thing that we have to challenge. And I think that goes back down to what we understand about the role of men and the role of the concepts of masculinity in society. What is written in our society's fabric, what's written into law, and who does that benefit? And therefore, how do we challenge that to make those changes? And I think when we start peeling those layers, I think some things that we've experienced ourselves as we've gone through that journey is that that's where we find the resistance, because it becomes personal. We have to challenge our own biases. We have to recognize and see them, and these things take change, and in that change, there's where I see some of the resistance from some men is trying to accept that there is privilege. They're trying to acknowledge that there is a problem that they can do something about, and to what we consider to be just regular norms and okay behavior of men in society. It's really something that needs to be changed, and that is what allows violence and some of these things to grow into assault, is by accepting and tolerating some of this, what we think through society are minor things. And that's what we talk about, masculinity in general. And I think that's where the conversations need to be had.
Yeah, and going off of that, that's exactly what it is. I think its resistance is inherent because it's not talked about, and because it's not talked about, people can feel personally attacked because, like Christian said, like if someone sees themselves as a as a gentleman or a decent person, they're like, all of a sudden you're going to say that I'm part of rape culture and all these other things, then it's a shocking and jarring thing. And there's also the discussion when people think domestic violence, they think physical violence, they think all these things. But in reality, there's the mental health aspect, there's the socialization aspect, and these are things that aren't unpacked regularly. So it's extremely important. Yeah, and resistance happens, but it's because of a lack of understanding.
Thank you. So we touched on some of the issues already, but I want to ask the question of what do you think some of the roots of sexual violence are? I know, Christian, you touched on some in Elliot, but yeah, what are the root causes that lead to sexual violence?
Yeah, when we're talking about sexual violence, I think we need to talk about power and control. We often, might conventionally think that sexual violence is an act of sex. It's not. Primarily, there's power and control involved with it. So I would say the roots are in this deep power and control culture, which gets back to what Christian and Elliot were sharing about how we've been socialized as men, growing up in privilege and in places of power and control and wanting to exert that power and control. So the socialized norms of masculinity that we've all absorbed growing up then perpetuate also then in concert with that our devaluation of women and girls. So there's this sort of perpetuation of men's power and privilege, and then a devaluation at the same time of women and girls, which then in turn perpetuate a culture which accepts violence and sexual assault against women and girls. So I think power and control are at the root, I think.
So from your perspective, what is the appropriate age or grade level to begin the discussion of, sexual assault prevention and consent to young boys?
As early as we start socializing them with anything else, because if you think about it, like that's when a lot of this culture and socialization starts. Doing, like, I can think of countless times growing up seeing parents and family members and older siblings going to like infant and toddlers being like, oh, is that your girlfriend? Or, oh, go give her a hug, or all this stuff. So we start acculturating and socializing our young boys and our young men and male identified youth that these things are okay. So, and those are the things that are expected from them, and those are the things that are supposed to happen. So like, yeah, it needs to start as early as possible. And I'm not saying we're gonna have these long theological conversations with 2-year-olds, but it's just the way that we approach these things and have these conversations. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
I would second that. Certainly, from my perspective, I have a 2-year-old daughter, and that's again, there's historically there's been work that women and girls have been asked to do in response to what men are doing in this sense, and just being able to say no and have a boundary and in a space, personal space, and being able to express that. That's where it starts. However, when we're talking about, I think, boys and young men, I think it's the understanding that when a woman is saying that needs to be respected, and it cannot be that I can see at too early of an age that we can start talking about respecting the space of others.
Yeah, I would just follow up and just totally agree with that. I mean, the earlier the better, and certainly developing models. I think we need new models of masculinity and breaking out of this sort of man box and the acculturation that Elliot talked about. But that needs to happen early. How do we build those new models? This is why the prevention work of TenMen is so substantive and so important as partners in this work against sexual assault and domestic violence, is to change the culture. It's going to be a long-term thing. We want to change the conditions which create a culture which allows for this kind of violence. We say in the program, most men are not violent, but as Christian mentioned earlier, most men are perpetrators of violence, and then most men are silent. And so we're trying to break that silence, and that can happen, as I think we're all saying, from a very young age, and creating new models, new ways, and healthy ways of manhood.
Okay. And so when reflecting on your youth and within your communities, how have you noticed that conversation changing from when you grew up, the conversation around sexual assault prevention and consent to present day? Have you noticed a change?
I could comment on that real quick. I grew up in Latin America, in Ecuador specifically, and looking back, I think there's still a lot of a male-dominated society there, and I think that looking back, that is not something that I would want to continue to be part of. However, I have seen changes. I think the Me Too movement and other things have allowed in some level that abusers can be held accountable, and that turning the conversation back to who's perpetrating these acts. And however, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. So I think we need to encourage the progress that has been made. I think I can see it changing. I think we need to continue to be part of that and move the needle further.
Okay.
Yeah, like reflecting on myself, it's just like when growing up, it wasn't really a conversation. Amongst my peers, amongst like elder, there was like some, right, like, oh, you have to show respect. There was no like accountability. There was nothing. It's just like, I'm going to send you a really quick message, and then that's it. Where what I'm seeing now with youth and young male identified folk is there is more conversation, there is more awareness, but it's really important to know that it's not like you get the knowledge, you do some acts, and then all of a sudden you're healed and you're like you're the problem's gone. No, it's constant. It's like any other repression level work. It's a constant spectrum where you always have to do the work. You're never, oh, I'm no longer this, like I'm no longer a perpetrator. And what I have seen too from younger men and younger boys, because it's more of a conversation and people growing up in the Me Too movement, all of a sudden they see themselves as like, I'm not a perpetrator. I'm not violent. But then in reality, there are still inherent things because we as a culture haven't been doing this that long, and we're looking at hundreds to thousands of years of oppression to women and children, and other marginalized groups. So it's a constant, and we just have to remind ourselves that.
Yeah, I would just chime in just a second. Again, what Christian and Elliot have said, awareness grows slowly, but I think consciousness is changing around these things, and conversations are happening. And in large part, I would also say because of course, the work historically of women, and particularly the Me Too movement, which we've mentioned, which has brought to awareness. So conversations are happening. But I know growing up, I mean, I can just, as an athlete, then someone who went on to coach in sports, and we know that unfortunately this culture quite often, and unfortunately goes hand in hand. I could say athletic culture, the classic sort of locker room culture that I grew up with, where there wasn't a consciousness of this. I think that consciousness is seeping in, and the effort of the TenMen program is to do just that, is to change and work at that level, to shift awareness and to open up these conversations that you're inviting us to have, which is so great, because we've got to start there and build from that. And as Elliot says, it takes time, right? Somebody doesn't just wake up and everything is great, but we want to change it from the inside out in some sense.
Absolutely. I agree that the conversations are definitely necessary and they have to be ongoing, and which I'm so grateful that we're having it today. We're having this discussion today. So I think my final question is going to be just individually, what prompted you to want to be a part of the TenMen project? Like what made you want to join?
Oh,
you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah, for me, the story, I think I've been surrounded by a very strong woman. However, I've seen their lives being deeply affected by the actions of other men in their lives. And, many times I question myself, am I someone like that? And can I be better than that? And then more recently, a specific sexual assault situation with a loved one in the last 4 or 5 years that really made me rethink about, what is my role in not only in helping after the fact, but what do I do to prevent this from other people from happening, and then finding resources like the TenMen that put the responsibility on men, and we need to recognize and act primarily.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, it's one of those things where like I have to, if I'm going to talk the talk, I have to walk the walk. And uh, I work with young people, and I do a lot of work with young male identified folk and men in general. And it's one of those things where when this opportunity came up, it felt like a natural fit for me, and it's something that I wanted to learn more and I wanted to contribute more, which is why I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you, and I'm excited that this is going to go out to the masses, and I get to meet other like-minded people like Lee and Christian, and then we can create solidarity and together make real movement.
Mm-hmm. And Elliot, I think it was a year ago this month, right, that you were in part of our first community conversation, and Elliot joined us, and then became a TenMen member and came in as part of our current cohort, which is so great. So that's just a sweet remembrance of first meeting you there in these conversations. So for me, I would say one other thing I just might add, I came to this work with some background in nonviolence training and social change work, social action work. This was really a consistent step for me. It just really felt in my concern for how men have throughout the ages perpetuated violence generally. So for me, it's a holistic sense. What is it that with men, from military interventions, violence at all layers and levels of society, what is it that has perpetuated amongst men the creation, if you will, of violence? So doing this work just felt very important and very good to me. Also, I have two daughters, now older and grown adult daughters, but it's significant to think about their well-being and safety in this world. So.
Thank you guys so much for sharing that. And I have to say, I think Rhode Island is very fortunate to have an initiative like this, a prevention measure like this, and the role models that you gentlemen are, and the message that you're sending out to your communities is beyond outstanding. This is very much needed. It's appreciated coming from a woman. Thank you. Unfortunately, our call ended before I was able to conclude the video, but I'm very grateful to the members of TenMen Project for joining in today's discussion regarding the prevention of sexual assault as a men's issue. And I hope by the discussion you're able to see that it is very much a men's issue. And as we continue our sexual assault awareness efforts, I hope that you bring that message back to your family, to your friends, to your community, and really help to start dismantle a lot of the harmful beliefs that pollute our culture, our society, those rape culture beliefs that people really hold on to, the victim blaming and shaming, the lack of accountability to offenders, and not supporting and believing survivors when they come forward to tell their truth. There's a lot of things that need to be undone within our community and within our criminal justice system and society collectively, and we're just getting started. So thank you so much to TenMen, and be well.